Hi everyone, and a very warm welcome to our webinar today, which is New Starters in Sage 50 Payroll. My name's Sarah, I'm your host and presenter today, and we are joined by my colleague Duncan, who is standing by in the background, ready and waiting to answer your questions. So here's a quick overview of what we'll go through today. So we'll begin by looking at the key information that you need to successfully add your new employees into Sage 50 Payroll. Next, we'll take a deeper dive into the employee wizard and explore the quick employee options to help streamline the setup process. We'll then walk through how to submit starter details to HMRC using your FPS or full payment submission. And then after that, we will cover a few typical situations you might encounter. So things like when an employee doesn't have a P45. So just common scenarios and some top tips in there as well. And finally, we'll wrap up with a short quiz just to test your understanding. It is just a little bit of fun to end the session on a high note, but feel free to pop any questions in the chat as we go along. We will have a bit of time for Q&A at the end too, but let's get started. So let's kick things off by looking at the key information you'll need to add a new starter into Sage 50 Payroll. So there are three main categories to focus on. So we've got personal details, payment details, and a starter form. So we'll start with personal details. So these are the essentials for setting up your employee record. So you've got things on there like full name, and that must match the official documents of the employee, so like a passport or a driving license. So that does mean there's no nicknames or shortened versions that you want to add in there. We then have the address. So in 50 Payroll, you do need at least 2 lines and valid postcode in there as well. We then have things like date of birth, gender, and national insurance number if they have it available. But getting these details right and getting them from the employee is really crucial, as it is going to be what HMRC use to match up the records when you do first submit them. We then have the payment details. So this section covers how the employee is going to be paid. So pay elements, what type of pay are they going to receive? Are they going to have basic pay? Are they on a salary? Do they have overtime or any bonuses? That leads into rates of pay. So are they going to be on a fixed monthly amount? Are they paid hourly? And then contracted hours as well. So how many hours are they actually going to work for your business? And then finally, we have the starter form, which is the missing piece of the puzzle. So the most common form is probably going to be the P45 from their previous employer, but they might not have a P45. And if they don't, then they'll want to complete what's called a starter checklist. But this is what has replaced the old P46 form. So you might see a couple of those terms mentioned today. There are a couple of less common forms. So things like the P46 pen, and that's for employees receiving an occupational pension from a previous employer, or your P46 expat, and that's just for employees seconded to work in the UK. So those are a lot less common. So for today's session, we will be focusing on your more typical starter forms, so the P45 and the starter checklist as well. So now that we've covered the information that you need, let's take a quick look at the starter forms themselves. So on this slide, you'll see a couple of screenshots. On the left, we've got the P45, and on the right, we have the starter checklist. So let's start things off with the P45. So this form actually comes in 3 different parts. So part 1 is going to be the employee's copy. Might be that they hand that to you by mistake. If they do, you can simply just give them it back. Now, part 2, that's the part that you're going to need as the new employer to set their record up in Sage 50 Payroll. So that's the part as an employer that you want to be looking out for. Now, there is also part 3 as well, which should be retained by you as an employer. But since RTIs came into play, that one's not as important. But as the employer, you can still retain it for your records. You know, does no harm having that there. Now, it might be that the employee doesn't have a P45, Might be that they've misplaced it or something like that. And if that is the case, then you will want to use a starter checklist instead, previously the P46. Now that form is available to download from the gov.uk website. I have included a link to it on the slide there as well, so definitely make sure to get the handouts downloaded. I would really recommend keeping a few of these spare, so a couple of spare copies of the starter checklist on hand. It is really a great tool for capturing key information about your new employee. It does even include some details that aren't on the P45, so a couple of bits around student and postgraduate loan, and actually specifically what plan type they're on as well. So it might well be that some people want, a new employee to fill this out as well as a P45. Or in place of. But once you've gathered all the necessary details from the employee, that's the point where you're going to be ready to set their record up in Sage 50 Payroll. And that's what we'll go into a little bit later in the live demonstration. So let's move on now to how you actually go and set up an employee's record in Sage 50 Payroll. There are a few different options that you've got. So the two main methods that you can use, the first one is the employee wizard. What the employee wizard does is that will walk you through the setup process step by step. So it is broken down into pages, which does make it a little bit easier to see and kind of review the information you're entering in as you go along. It is a great choice if you want a bit more guidance when you're adding a new employee, or if you just want to enter, some more detailed information. But just bear in mind with this option, it does take a little bit longer to complete compared to the other method, which leads me on nicely to the next method, which is the quick employee option. And I did touch on this just before, but it is, as it says on the tin, the faster option. So this will open up in a single page form, like the one you can see on the screenshot on the slide there. And you simply work through the fields on that page and input the required details all in one page. But yes, as I said, as the name suggests, it is ideal when you need to get someone set up quickly into the software. But just a quick tip for both of these methods, so it doesn't matter which one that you're going to be using, it will apply to both. Any fields that are marked with the asterisks, those are the ones that are mandatory. So you will need to complete these in order to successfully create the record in 50 Payroll. But if you do come across a field that doesn't have an asterisk against it, those fields, if you don't have that information to hand, you can leave blank for now. It might be some of them that you want to go back in and pop into, into the record in a later date, but it is just the ones with the star next to them that are the mandatory fields for creating the record initially. For today's demo, I will be focusing more on the quick employee option, just so we can see how straightforward it can be. Now, before we move into the demonstration, I do want to quickly mention another way that you can add a new starter, and that's by importing them directly from Sage HR. Now, if you are using Sage HR and you've already entered the new starter details there, you can import that information straight into 50 Payroll. Now, it does just save having to manually re-enter everything. It does ensure that employees fully set up on HR before you go ahead and do things like uploading online pay slips. And you can do that by using the import employee data option, which you'll find, as you can see in the screenshot, just at the top of your tasks there. Now, this feature will check for any new information or any updated employee information on Sage HR. And it will ask you what information that you want to import. In this case, you would be selecting new starters. Once selected, Sage 50 Payroll will automatically then create the record for you. Now, I won't actually be demonstrating this method today, but if you are using Sage HR, it is definitely a feature I'd recommend exploring. You can also learn a bit more about it on any of our online payslips webinar recordings, which will go into processes like that into a bit more detail. But that's just a little bit on Sage HR, and I have linked some further guidance at the bottom of the slide. So if you are using Sage HR, make sure to get the handouts downloaded and you can get a bit more information on that. But for now, let's bring the slides down and jump into a demo. Now, before we look into Stage 50 Payroll, I do want to just get up a couple of examples and take a closer look at an example of a P45 and a starter checklist, just to highlight a few key areas you might want to pay some attention to. Now, if we look at the P45 first, we would be, as an employer, receiving Part 2. And this is what we would use to set the information up and set the record up in Payroll. So you can see we have things like the national insurance number, got the employee name, the leaving date of the previous job. Now, I do want to touch on that. The leaving date is really important. So you do want to be checking that if you do receive the P45. Just remember that that leaving date does have to fall into the current tax year, so your 2025-26 tax year. If it doesn't, you will need to handle things slightly differently when you receive this documentation, but we will cover that a little bit later in the session. Now, box 5 indicates whether student loan deductions should continue. It is just a simple tick box, and you'll notice it doesn't actually give us a lot of detail about the student loan plan type. So that's where your starter checklist becomes really useful, as that does actually ask for that little bit more detail to get your record set up. You'll also see the tax code, leaving date, and if the tax code is cumulative as well, and the total pay to date and tax to date as well. And they're going to be really important if they are on a cumulative code, because that's going to be the information you enter into Payroll, into the employee's record, to ensure that the tax is kind of just going to pick up from where it left off. And then just a quick reminder, we did touch on this earlier, you will also receive a part 3 of the P45, but again, it did used to have a bit more of a role before RTI was introduced, but now it's mainly just for your records. So the relevant data is going to be automatically included in your full payment submission when you do first submit your employee. So that's just a few things to look out for on the P45. If we now move on and just take a look at the starter checklist. So again, this is available on the gov.uk website, and it is what replaced the old P46 one, but you'll probably hear me mention the term P46, as that is still what it's referred to in 50 Payroll. Now, I have linked the article in the handout, but you can fill this out online or you can download it as a PDF if you do want to keep a few spare copies as an employer. It's just going to be whatever's most convenient for the employee. Now, even if your employee has a P45, again, I would still recommend them getting to complete a starter checklist, especially if they have things like a student loan. But as you can see, it is a really great way to capture any personal details. So we've got the last name, first name, home address, national insurance number and date of birth, and their employment circumstances as well. So this is going to help determine what tax code they go on that first pay period, dependent on what statement that they're selecting. You can see we've got statement A if it's the first job since the 6th of April, statement B if they've had another job or been getting job seekers, or if they already have another job, you can see it'll put them straight onto the tax code. So there is quite a lot of information on here, and it's quite good because it'll give the employee a little bit of a heads up of what to expect. You can see the last page here, just that little bit about student loans. So it will give a little bit more detail on plan type, which is really going to assist you as the new employer in entering those details into the record in Sage 50 Payroll. So we've had a little look at the two main starter forms that you'll receive. Now what I'm going to do, I just want to jump back into 50 Payroll and let's put this into action. So I'm already logged in. I've got my monthly company open. I've last updated and submitted in my October payroll. So my next pay date is November. So I've set my processor date ready for my next pay run. Now, as mentioned, there are two main ways to add a new employee. So I'm just going to go to the employee option, just in the bottom left there. As you can see, I have Employee Wizard and I've got the Quick Employee. So you can find both the options under your employee tasks. But let's start by taking a quick look at the Employee Wizard first. So you can see I don't have anyone highlighted on the payroll for now. And you can see in the Employee Wizard, it will just give me that first option to record the details using the starter form. If I click next, you can see it will very much make me put the information first until I can then move on to the next page. So this method will walk you through the setup process step by step and page by page. And you'll just keep clicking next, enter the required information until you reach the end, and then you'll be able to click finish, and that will then create that employee record for you. It is a great option if you do prefer a bit more of a guided approach, and it does break things down nicely. So it can feel a little bit overwhelming in terms of entering the information sometimes. But I do want to cancel out of this just for now and look at the Quick Employee method. Now, as you can see, this does look very different. It'll bring up a single page form, just like the one we showed you in the slides. Everything you need to enter is right here on one single screen. And just a little reminder, it is any fields that are marked with the asterisks that are the mandatory fields. So you will actually need to complete those to be able to successfully create that employee record. Now, I do want to show you a bit of a handy, helpful feature here, especially if you're hiring someone from, say, the same department or with similar settings as an existing employee. So my new employee is going to be going into the same department as employee 5. And you can actually copy settings over from an existing employee just to save a bit of time. So I'm going to highlight employee 5. And I'm just going to go into the employee wizard option first, because that does look a bit different. And what you can see now is it gives me a couple more options. So I can either stick with my original, or I can create the employee based on my existing employee record 5. Or if employee 5 had left, for example, and they were coming back, I could also re-employ them as well. But obviously employee 5 hasn't left, so I wouldn't be selecting that option. That would just be if they were a leaver that is then returning, and that's going to help you filling out all the personal details as well. I'm just going to cancel out of that for now. As I mentioned earlier, we will be focusing on the quick employee option today. So I'm going to go over and click on quick employee, and you can see, do I want to base my new information and my new employee on an existing record and copy over the information? So I'm going to say yes to that. And what you'll see is it has pulled through some of the details. So it's pulled through the pay elements that was in employee 5's records. So they're going to have the same pay elements as employee 5. And it's also pulled through the same department as well. So it's put them straight into the admin department. In addition to that, it's also automatically put them on a monthly pay frequency. And then from there, it is just a case of filling in the remaining details. So things like employee name, address, and tax information. So what we'll do is we'll go through and fill that out. So I'm not very creative with my employee names. I'm just going to fill in these details. Remember, I do need to have 2 address lines in and a postcode as well. going to pop a date of birth in there. Record my right to work check. I'm just going to record that elsewhere for now. I started on the 10th of November. Now it's already pulled through monthly as my payment frequency because I've used employee 5 to copy over the information. And I don't have the sort code or account number, but they're not mandatory fields, so I don't need to enter that at this point. Now, my employee doesn't actually have a P45, but they have given me a new starter checklist. Now, remember, 50 Payroll is a little bit old school. It is still called P46 in Sage 50 Payroll, but that just means a new starter checklist. So they're the same thing. Now I'm going to select statement B. That's a statement that they've indicated on the new starter checklist. But what I do want to show you is if they do have a P45, you can see it does give a lot more information to enter. Now, the good thing is if the employee did give you a P45 and see the leaving date was in last tax year, if you entered this date in last tax year, so if I say the 1st of March 2025, what it'll do, it'll actually automatically grey these boxes out. But we will touch on that in a bit more detail later in the webinar. So I'm just going to select P46, make sure I've got my starting declaration in. And my NI number and category. Now, my employee doesn't have any student loans, so I can leave those as is. Now, if I was using the 50 Payroll pensions module, I don't want to assign a pension scheme at this point. So remember, if you are using the pension assessment in the 50 Payroll pensions module, you would leave this blank. And the reason for that is when you run your first pension assessment, the system will automatically assess and enroll the employee if they need to go into the scheme. So yeah, if you are using the pensions module, you don't want to add the pension at this point, but if you're not, then feel free to pop that in when you are creating the record. Now I do, because this employee is a salaried employee, I do want to add a gross salary in there. So they're going to get £3,000 per month. And I'm now ready. I've got all my mandatory fields filled out. So now I can save and clear. And there we can see that new employee has now been created. So we've now successfully set up the employee record and it's ready to be used when we're processing payroll. Just a quick note to keep in mind, although the system automatically calculates the monthly salary based on the details you've entered, so you've just seen me say, £3,000 per month. If your new starter hasn't actually worked a full month, for example, if they've joined halfway through, so my employee joined on the 10th, you will need to manually adjust their pay to reflect the actual days worked in that first pay period. So I'm just going to highlight all my employees. I've already entered payments for all the rest of my employees. So I'm just going to go down to my new employee. So you can see the £3,000 salaries pulled through automatically from when I've created the record. But I do want to manually adjust it to reflect the days that they've actually worked. So my employees started on the 10th of the month. They're paid for the calendar month. And there's 20 working days in the calendar month, and they've worked 15 out of them. So I'm just going to do 15 divided by 20. And that's just one way that you could manually work that out. Now, I do want to stress it is that how it is worked out may well vary depending on your own company's policies. So that's just one way that you can actually do it. It is always best to double check what your policy is as an employer. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to save that. I'm now at a point where I'm ready to process my payroll. So I've added my record. I can do that via Quick Employee or the Employee Wizard. I've prorated my payments, so I've paid them for hours worked. So I'm just going to move on before I submit my FPS to actually processing my payroll. So I'm going to go ahead and update records for the 30th of November and get those new details locked in. Now, in terms of actually notifying HMRC about this new starter, that is actually handled automatically when we send our first FPS for that specific employee. So the FPS is going to include all the key details like their start date, address, their starter declaration, and any student loan indicator if there is one. So you don't actually really need to do anything extra with this. You would just send your FPS as normal, and HMRC will then be informed. So I've updated my records. Might be that I've got to do a nominal link, but I don't have one on this payroll. I'm now at the point where I'm ready to do my full payment submission. So I'm just going to go ahead and go straight into my FPS. This won't come up for you. It's just because we're in a demo environment today. Now I'm going to continue through my FPS. See, I've got my usual employees on there, but what you'll notice is employee 11 has the starter flag assigned to them. So if you do have new starters on your payroll, always a good shout just to double check this important information window and just make sure you can see that start date pop up in this column here. And that's a good sign that, I've got all my details entered and that starter information and starter flag is going to be sent to HMRC as it should be. So I'm going to go ahead and get that submitted. So that's my new starter processed and submitted. I do just want to recap that last step there. We've added our employee. We've then went through, processed the employee, and then we've submitted our FPS. So the system will automatically include all of your key details for your new employee. There's nothing extra you need to do there. So that's going to include their start date, as we've just seen in the demo. Things like address, starting declaration, student loan indicators. So that won't show in the important information window, but that will go through in the background of the submission. So no need to do anything separately. You would just submit your FPS as you normally would. As you've seen in the demo, the last FPS date was shown as the 30th of November. That means once we send the next FPS, well, now we've sent our next FPS, HMRC is then going to receive all of the relevant starter information all automatically. But if you do want to learn a bit more about how the FPS works and a bit more specifically what is included in the submission, I have linked the article at the bottom there. So that'll cover all the basics and give it a bit of a breakdown of the data that's sent across. So before we move on to the quiz, I do want to take a moment just to run through some of the most common questions that we do get around new starters. I do have 3 examples for you, and it might help clarify a few things if you come across some similar situations. So common question 1, what if the leaving date on a P45 is in a previous tax year? I did touch on this and show you this all earlier in the webinar, but if you have an employee who joined, say, in October and they left back early March, since new tax year starts in April, that would mean their previous employment ended last year. And in that case, you don't actually need to enter any previous pay or tax figures from the P45. So those amounts aren't actually going to be relevant to your current tax year, and payroll will help you out as you've seen in the demo. So if you pop in the leave date and it isn't in the current tax year, it will automatically grey out the previous pay and the previous tax fields. So best practice with this one, just double check the date on the P45. If it is from last tax year, you can skip entering those figures. But I have linked some additional guidance from gov.uk on the slide if you want to read more. Now, second common question, what if an employee doesn't have a P45 or start a checklist? Now, it does happen from time to time. If your new employee hasn't provided either form, you'll simply select P46 as an option when adding them to the system. But when you do that, it will give you an option to choose the starting declaration as none. Now, what that does mean is it will temporarily assign them a 0T tax code, which means there will be tax on all earnings until HMRC provides an updated code. But hopefully on that note, that does kind of encourage the employee to get the correct form to you. But if they don't, HMRC will eventually issue a new tax code notice, and then you can update the record accordingly from there. So yeah, there is an option, if they haven't provided it, but it does mean they're going to be taxed quite a high amount. But I do just want to quickly show you where that is in payroll. I'll just bring the slides down real quick. I'm just going to go back into the quick employee option for this one. You can see, so if you don't receive either of the forms, you would just go to P46 and you can see you've got this statement for none at the bottom, but that does mean, as you can see in the tax code, a 0T week 1 month 1 basis. So yeah, definitely important that they get those forms to you as soon as they can. That's the second common question that we do seem to get a lot around new starters. Now, the last one is, what if I receive a P45 or start a checklist after the employee's first FPS has actually been submitted? Now, answer with this one, it does just depend on whether you've already received a new tax code notice from HMRC. So if you have, then you can ignore the P45 or start a checklist and just go with whatever HMRC's provided. But if you haven't received a new code yet, you can still go back and enter the starter details using the starter form wizard in the employee record. And I'll just bring the slides down again just to show you exactly where it is to do that. So if we use employee 11, just as a bit of an example, now we have already updated these, so they will show. But if, say, for example, employee 11 came and gave me a P45, remember they did fill out a new starter checklist instead, but they've handed me P45 information. I've not actually received any tax code change from HMRC. And if I wanted to enter that, I can go into the record and go into starter form up here. I can change that to P45, sorry. And then it will allow me to enter in the details from the P45, including the pay and tax to date, providing the leave dates in this current tax year. So we can always enter it, and that's, of course, if you haven't already received something further from HMRC. So that's a little bit on the common questions that we get around new starters. I did want to include these just in case they might help any of you during your payroll setup, because you do get those ones quite often. So, and with that, we have reached the end of the main content for today's webinar on new starters. And that does mean it is time for our final section, which is the quiz. So it is just 3 questions to test your knowledge today from today's session. It is completely optional, but I would love for you to take part. Here's how it works. So what I'll do is I'll launch a poll on your screen for each question. You'll select your answer and then hit submit. After about a minute, I'll close the poll and then reveal the correct answer. So I will give you a little bit of time to get your answers in. So let's get started with question number 1. So question number 1, I'll launch that now. Which of the following is not included on a P45? So is that the national insurance category, the previous pay and tax details, or the tax code? So that's which of the following is not included on a P45? Give you about 30 more seconds to get your answers in there. You can see we've got a few coming in already. Give you a couple more seconds. Right, brilliant. It looks like a lot of you have answered that now. So what I'll do is let's end that and we'll see what people thought. So which of the following is not included on a P45? So it looks like most of you have went for national insurance category, and that would be correct. So that is right. The national insurance category is not included on the P45. So it does include previous pay and tax details and the tax code as well, but it doesn't actually include the NI category. So good job with that one, guys. Looks like most of you got that right. So let's move on to question number 2. So question number 2 is, how do you send new employee starter information to HMRC? So is that submitting the employer payment summary, sending part 3 of the P45, or submitting the full payment submission? Go ahead and get your answers submitted, everyone. I'll leave the poll open for another 30 seconds and then we'll take a look at the answers and see how you all did. It looks like we've got a few answers coming in for that one. Looks like most of you got that in, so I'll end that and see what everyone thought. Looks like we've almost had a clean sweep there. So it looks like most of you went for submitting the full payment submission, which of course is correct. So as we covered earlier, the FPS will include all of your necessary details, your starter details for HMRC. So once you send that, they're automatically notified. So great job. Looks like most of you, so 98% got that right. So last question now. Let's get that launched. The last question is, it's a true or false question, this one. So 50-50 is, I do not need to enter pay or tax details if a new employee left their previous employment last tax year. So again, this one's just a true or false. So you want to vote for true or false with this one. And that's, I do not need to enter pay or tax details if a new employee left their previous employment last tax year. And that's off the P45. You can see the answers come flooded in there, everyone. Great, let's go ahead and see what everyone thought. So yeah, with this one, it is true. So if the date that they've left the previous employment is in a previous tax year on the P45, you would not want to enter those pay or tax details. So yeah, got a large majority with that one. Well done, everyone. Did very well on that there. So that does bring us to the end of the quiz. So thank you so much to everyone that did take part, and well done to everyone who got those right. And we do still have a few minutes left, so make sure to get your handouts downloaded and pop any remaining questions into the Q&A as well. So we will stick around and make sure we've answered as many as we can before we wrap up. So I do want to wrap things up by running through some further support. So we do have a couple of upcoming webinars that I want to talk about. So we have Process and Levers, which is Friday at 10 a.m., which will link in nicely to today's webinar. We do have one on mastering mistakes next Wednesday as well, so make sure to get signed up for those if you haven't already. And then an exciting one coming soon, we will have the pensions badge running in November and December. So do keep an eye out on the registration page for that, and that will be scheduled in soon, and a nice chance for you to earn another badge there. The Help Centre as well is a really great resource. So as you all know, you can access it by clicking on the help icon in Sage 50 Payroll. That will take you straight there. You can access our technical support guides, our recorded on-demand webinars, and info on how to get in touch with our support team if you need to. I do want to shout out Sage Uni as well. That is a really great resource. So you can do anything from bite-sized bits of learning to full certification. So you really can do it all at your own pace. Just go to the link, so sageu.com. It is totally free to set up an account and explore. So as promised, for the next few minutes, I will stick around to give Duncan a hand with any questions that might have came through. So I will pop on a mute for now. If you are leaving us at this point, if you do have a second to fill out the survey, that really would be appreciated. But I'm going to pop on a mute for now, just to give Duncan a hand. I will see you all shortly to wrap the session up. Hi again, everyone. I hope you've all enjoyed today's session. I will close the session down in the next minute or so. Haven't had too many more questions come through. As you exit, you will see a short survey. If you can take a moment to fill that out, your feedback is really valuable to us. We would love to hear what you thought, what worked well, what could be improved, so we can keep making these sessions even better for you. You will also receive a follow-up email later today. It will have a link to today's webinar recording on there and information on how to register for future sessions. But thanks again for joining me and Duncan today. Hopefully we will see you again soon, but it is goodbye for now.